hopefully you saw from the main stage demo earlier today, I think Alfresco 2.1 is a significant leap forward into ease of use with RM. When I talk to records managers and compliance people, we spend a lot of time talking about features. So people talk about the file plan. How do you configure the file plan? How extensive? How many levels can I have? How do I put a disposition schedule on one of those? Or they talk about things like cut-off and how do I declare records and what standards do you meet? And we spend a lot of time, and if you're responding to bids from customers that come in and say, you know, we're looking for a records management solution, have you got these unique features? And give you a checklist. And the reality is, none of that matters. Absolutely none of that matters, because if you go to any of the RM systems out there, most of those have got all those features. They'll all have a file plan, they'll all do in place, they'll all do yada, yada, yada. And that's not really the problem. The problem you've got is user adoption. And when I've talked to records managers in the past, what they're saying is that our RM projects fail. And they fail because I can't get users to adopt the solution. And this is borne out by some industry research. Down here, Cheryl McKinnon. Cheryl McKinnon is a senior analyst with Forrester. And this is a quote from a report. Recently I did a webinar with Cheryl, and we actually went through and talked about what the problems are with RM and is it the technology. And basically it's not the technology. She actually says, you know, user adoption still remains a significant problem with that. Why is that the case? Well, let's look at it from an end user's point of view. The end user is over here, and they're content creators and they're content users. I was just at a customer session earlier on, and they were talking about just getting users to use ECM solutions is a challenge. You know, they have to see some value from using an ECM solution, let alone putting an RM load on top of that. Because all these end users want to do, they want to find content. They want to find the latest version of this presentation. They want to find the latest version of that report, of that price list. It doesn't matter what it is. All they want to do is access content. And then they're having to do their job. So what they're doing is sharing and collaborating. They want to find a piece of content. They want to create that piece of content. They want to make it easy to send that content to somebody else, either within the organization, collaborate on it, work on it together, review and approve it, or they want to share that with somebody outside the organization. So this is the things that they care about. So they want to be, I should have put find at the top really, but then it didn't make a nice triangle, so I actually changed those over. But what you want to be able to do is find information, you want to be able to edit it, create new versions of that content. You want to be able to workflow it. I want to create a presentation, workflow a copy to Roy and say, look, this is the presentation we're going to give at Summit. What do you think? He can update it, revise some of the slides, send it back, add his content, and we can work through that together. They wanted to do collaboration, and they want access control. They want to control who can see their documents. Because if I'm creating a report, it may be a sensitive report, and I don't want to make anybody in the organization see that. If it's on my desktop, I can control who can see it on my Mac. But if I put it into an ECM solution, how do I make sure that only the right people can see that? So these are the things that the end users worry about. And the question is, does RM help them? And RM doesn't. RM is a tool for information managers. It's for records managers. It's for people that are trying to have that compliance and that information governance and control corporate information for a long period of time. And RM is a major overhead for these guys because they now asked to understand a file plan. My example this morning, telling a marketing person, when you've posted something to one of your social media sites, you need to go to a file plan and you need to create a record folder and you need to go down there and add some metadata so we can track it and do all of that. They're never going to do it. And what you end up finding is everything is filed under aardvark because aardvark is the first pull down in the drop-down list. So where is the content that people are trying to manage? When I talk to people, they say, well, it should be in our systems. But that's actually wrong. What you'll find is it's spread all over the place. And the reason for that is again, it's so hard to collaborate. So down here, I've got my users working in ECM solution. But out here, I've got the people that I need to work with, my business partners. From a marketing point of view, that might be my ad agency. It might be a PR agency. It may be a media company. All the graphics that you see around the summit today, we have an external person that does all our graphic design. Well, they don't get access to our internal systems. All of that content is out. So how do people work? Firewall stops those people coming in, so people work with email. So I'll take content out of the ECM solution, attach it to an email, and I'll post it to somebody. They'll reply, I'll update mine, and we'll send it back, and we'll do that, toggle it back. But the problem is, do I remember to put that back in my ECM solution so that now I've got that content inside there so that you can track it and make it a record? Or the USB drive. You know, there's people going around asking for my presentations, capturing my presentations on a thumb drive, and actually then doing something with that. Or what we're finding is more and more people working on these file sharing sites. I was at a Gartner conference recently where one of the CIOs stood up and talked about Dropbox. How can I get Dropbox out of my organization? He's put in place measures where people shouldn't be able to use Dropbox, but when he did an audit, he found over 1,000 users that were using it. Some research we did, how do people collaborate in business? We went out to 1,800 users, business users, IT users, to understand how they're collaborating. I used this for a presentation earlier on, so apologies if you're at that presentation. But the main way people collaborate is work email. So now how do you make sure that you capture that? And personal email, if somebody's using Gmail or one of their other OpenMail or whatever it is to share content, how do I capture that content and again feed it back into the RM solution? So what you end up is with these information silos, where you have content down here where it may have started here, but then somebody's taken it out and sent that content out to be collaborated on somewhere else. And you've got something down here that you say, right, I've got this, I now can declare it as a record and it's moving through. But what you're not realizing is that the final version is actually in somebody's email account, or the final version is actually out on somebody's Dropbox account. So the record that you're managing isn't the record that was actually issued as part of the project. Alfresco One is different. And we have this Alfresco One solution where, yes, document management. When I started in document management 20-odd years ago, people just wanted to be able to manage Office files. Then people want to be able to do team collaboration, so we've added that. People are reporting the demise of paper. But no, you're still going to be able to scanning in imaging of paper. Rich media, people want to be able to do videos, photographs, other types of files. And then social publishing, be able to publish that content out to social channels. Process management, using tools like Alfresco Workdesk to manage transactional processes and the content that goes through there. Mobile support, and then web content services. So that's all the stuff that you get with Alfresco One. But with RM, any of that can be declared as a record at any point in time. So I can go through and I can then say, that social publishing, that published you done, I can declare as a record. That image I've scanned in, I can declare that as a record. We have this hybrid approach, which means that you're going to keep more of your content in your internal systems. So now with Alfresco One, I can start on-premise. I can synchronize some content out to the cloud. I can invite my business partners in. We can work on that content, possibly via mobile devices, possibly my business partners. We can update, modify that document. And at the end of the process, we can remove it from the cloud and then just say, define that as a record. And now what you're going to do is starting to move that through its disposition schedule. Very important that you never lose control of that content, because it's either here on your on-premise or your own installation of Alfresco, or it's in the cloud, or it's being synchronized and in both places. So now, no longer do you have to worry about records being attached to email and sent out. No longer do you have to worry about them being sent out onto Dropbox or one of those file sharing sites. You know that the content's always under control, and that at the appropriate time in the content's life cycle, you can then declare that as a record and move it under control and keep it for a longer period of time. So what we're looking at is this record continuum. On the left-hand side, you're giving your end users a tool that allows them to work to get their job done. They can create content, they can go through and review it, they can edit it, they can send it out to the cloud, they can collaborate on it with other people, they can revise it, it can go through a number of iterations, And then at the appropriate time, when that contract is approved, I can now declare it as a record. When that invoice is keyed for payment, I can now declare that as a record. When that HR record, the review, the appraisal review has gone through and we're all in agreement on it, I can now declare that as a record and move it under the RM control, and now we start moving it through its normal life cycle. Alfresco RM, we are DoD 5015.02 certified. We went back through a recertification this year. We came out with a new version of RM, so we had to go back through the certification process. To my knowledge, we're the only certified open source records management solution. Now, often people talk to me about other RM standards. The one that comes up is MoRec. But to my knowledge, there's not that many companies that are going through MoRec certification. And often people will say, well, if it's past DoD, then at least I have some comfort level of knowing that it does what it says it's meant to do. It does do records management. So we came out with Records Management 2.1, and earlier on today, on the main stage demo, we showed some of this in action. We've added in 3 major features. There's lots of other stuff that are in RM 2.1. The first one is in-place records. The ability to declare a record in place so that the end user doesn't lose control of their file. It's hard to get user adoption if I'm telling the end user, you know that contract you've been negotiating, well, you now need to take it away from where you've been working on it and move it into that file plan over there and put it under RM control. And if you ever need to access it in the future, you've got to go and try and find it in that file plan, which makes no sense to you at all. If I can say to them, don't worry, you do that negotiating that contract, you approve it in place, you declare it in place. Now, if you ever got questions on it, it's still there. Just click on it and you can open it and you can answer your supplier's questions and you can tell them what you agreed on that contract. They're more likely to do that. What I hear from a lot of records managers is the end users will say, yeah, I'll put it under RM control. They'll copy it into the file plan and they have a copy in the file plan, but they also have a copy on their desktop because they don't want to lose control of it. Within place, you blur that. Now you say to them, it's your document, you leave it where it is, you declare it in place, we'll manage it, but you can still access it just like you would before. Automatic reconciling, that's what you saw this morning on main stage. Going through and saying to an end user, you don't even have to worry about records. We know the business process, we know when things ought to be records. And what we'll do is we'll declare those for you in the background. And that can be as simple as an attribute change. And a dynamic file plan. Records managers don't want to be managing the file plan. How can we take that away and make it easy for the file plan to actually grow and Alfresco to understand when to create record folders and where to put records as they flow into the RM? And there's more. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Roy, who will talk about the key features in RM 2.1.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just quickly run you through some of the key features, as Paul said, go into a bit more detail, try and explain why we've done what we've done. So there's a little bit of repetition, but that's good, so hopefully we'll sort of drive home the point. So this is really, I think, the keyest feature from my point of view, is the ability to easily declare records. I think, as Paul kind of said, you know, user adoption we've seen for RM is almost impossible if the user has to know anything about the file plan, really. So that means, you know, if I've got a document in my hand as a user, if I have to know where the file plan is, which part of the file plan I have to put it, why I've got to put it there, when I have to put it there, you know, instantly there's a huge barrier to adoption. So the objective was to basically simplify that to a single click process for the user, but also in a way that we could automate it. All right? So that means now, when you're working in your authoring environment and you're doing your stuff and you're doing your day job, which is really what you want your content users to be doing, it means records management can kind of happen around you. is the objective. All right, so when we're talking about record declaration, that's what we're talking about. The other key point is the side effect of this, or the positive side effect of this is that because record declaration is suddenly now super easy for users, it means it becomes, you suddenly get this influx of records coming from the users, whereas before, the records management team are going, where are all the records? I know stuff's happening, I'm not getting anything, I don't know where they are. Suddenly now, they're getting this influx of records because obviously it's super easy to capture them. So allowing a user to simply say this is a record very easily is a good thing, but it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve all the problems. Now, before, when your record slid into sort of obscurity as far as a user and it disappeared off your screen, and you knew it was a record but it had disappeared, that's kind of no good really. If you're working on a month-by-month basis, or you're working with a collection of documents and things start to become records, you need those in your working context to carry on your job. Okay. And also, it is very disconcerting if you imagine, you press a button or an action occurs, and suddenly this document that you've been working on sort of slides out of view. So when we talk about in place, what we're really talking about from a technical perspective is allowing a document to reside in two folders. Okay, it's a misconception that when you see an in-place record that there are two copies, or there's a prototype of it, or something that's some sort of mirror. We only keep one record. Okay, and what we do is we simply give it two parents, and that means that we can be absolutely sure that we don't have any record duplication, which is obviously important, but also that all the security measures and permissions and capabilities and all the other aspects that are very important for the records management team are all maintained. Okay, so it's really kind of giving the users like a window onto the doc. It's kind of it kind of projects to the users the illusion that the record is still there. However, the records management team have full control over it. Obviously, that's not the end of the story, because you can imagine now we've got this flow of records coming from the users, both automatically and manually, and they've got to go somewhere. All right. And when we go through the demo, you'll see that the users aren't required to select where these things should go, and not necessarily should they, only that they are records. So then this means that suddenly we've got this big kind of all these records flowing into the records management team. They're starting to pile up, and we don't want obviously the records management team to become overwhelmed and spend all their time doing the menial task of filing these records away or classifying them. And so that's where we introduced the idea of automated record classification. And we actually fall back on our content rules system to do this, and I'll show you how that's done later. But the power behind this is because we're using the content rules, it means that we can look at the characteristics of the record that's coming in. We can look at the properties, the metadata, the types, the aspects, and those things can be obviously aspects and types that you've added as customizations that are specific to your business, and you can use that information to define rules that will automatically classify these incoming things for you. Okay, so instantly you can imagine the vast bulk of information that's coming in to the file plan is well known and should be well marked up, and so can be easily classified automatically, instantly freeing up the records management team for other jobs. Now, obviously, part of the records management team's other jobs is maintaining the file plan and defining the file plan and all the classifications on there. Now, the classic example, when we're talking about a dynamically constructed file plan, the most obvious example is a situation where you've got periodic records. Okay, so you've got invoices, sales orders, that go by month or quarter or whatever. And in that situation, you don't want to have your records management team, every month, every quarter, having to go through and build the next kind of file or folder and make sure everything flows into there. So that's where we start to use rules, and we can look at the context, both of the actual record itself, or the current period, and we can use that information based on a rule to actually start to dynamically create parts of the file plan. Okay, so again, what we're doing is trying to automate the more kind of, the routine aspects of the records management team, because ultimately, although our primary focus initially in this release is to ensure that the users, the content users, can do their content job, at the same time, what we want to do is also effectively free up the records managers to do, to focus on the really difficult stuff that they need to worry about. Now we've got our users flowing in our records, we've got them going into our file plan and being classified and the file plan being created. But obviously we have the concept of a record being complete, which is obviously acquiring all the information we need to ensure that the record has, business context. And again, we can do that intelligently by using the rules mechanism to gather that information from the actual content itself, using kind of, metadata extractors to gather the metadata, or from people by requesting workflows for more information, or actually, from the context in which it's being filed. So we can kind of gather all this information together and place it onto the actual record itself, and again, in an automated manner with rules that we can proliferate throughout the file plan. And again, we can also help with the job of picking out things that are wrong, which is actually, I think, quite useful. So again, big flow of records coming in, records management team have got all of their nice stuff flowing nicely through to their file plan, capturing the information where they can, and they're working on the exceptions. And again, you can imagine that common mistakes, occur with particular things. All the data for this invoice isn't there, you haven't specified the customer, this isn't a record clearly, or something like that. Okay, so again, we can use rules on the file plan to help deal with these exceptions, to go back via a workflow to the community that added the record and ask for more information, or simply, turn the record back and explain why this should never have come to us. So all of those things kind of combined together give us what we're sort of calling a smart file plan. Whereas before, traditionally, even in Alfresco, the file plan was simply a structure which we hung disposition schedules off and used to classify. Now we can actually start to add smarts into that. We can automatically build itself, it can file records sensibly, it can gather information, it can deal with exceptions. So if you imagine if you've got your records management team and your content management team kind of working in unison and having set up the rules for the policies that you understand well, then what you're left with, the bits that are going to fall out, are the exceptions to the rule, or the things that actually you need to start thinking about in terms of, how do we deal with this type of record, or how do we deal with this new whatever, okay? So again, the intention is that the records management team are essentially focusing on the things that you really want them to focus on, not having to worry about, creating folders and where things are going. So that's obviously there's a lot more detail to that. I've just kind of done a really high-level skim over that for the sake of you that aren't technical, but if anybody's got technical questions or want to know any more detail, just grab me afterwards. Paul's provided me with a couple of videos that I'll just quickly talk you through that will show you some of these features in action to give you a bit of real-life context. So this is just our normal dashboard, and we're going to go into a customer case files site and go into our case files doclib. Now we're in normal Alfresco share here, okay, so we haven't quite got to the records bit here, and we're just going to go and have a look at our, you can see we've got our case file at the top and all the images that are associated with that case file, and we're going to go and have a look at the details of that. And through a normal customization, we've got this case close flag, which we're going to set and save. And again, you can imagine that's just a normal user's job. I don't know if you can see the top left-hand corner there, we've got this little icon. Some of the details have changed. This thing's just become a record. Okay, the user hasn't to do anything other than indicate that it's closed. The pictures weren't, however, closed. What we've done is we've set up this case closed kind of area here. Just going to drag across that folder, sort of indicate that, the whole case itself is closed. And so now when we go and have a look inside, you'll see that, again, not just the document, but all of the associated artifacts have now been made a record. Okay. Now we've just jumped into the file plan here, and again we'll show you how this all gets flown through in the next example. But there we go. This is where it's ended up. It's case folder 20 whatever it was, and there's my records. Now this is actually where they live, right? But as far as the user is concerned, he can still see them where they were, all right? And that's the important thing to remember. So another example here, the social media publishing example, and we're going to go in, and what we want to do in here, we manage all our media files. We're going to go and grab a new presentation and drop it in, and we want to publish this presentation out to the world so people can see it. So there we go. We go and grab the published channel stuff. I'm going to put it on SlideShare, and obviously I'm going to Twitter about it so everybody can find my new presentation. Okay, and then that's going to go through and publish. So that's sent all that stuff off. And as we saw this morning, we're going to go through to our tags so we remember where we published that to. We use just a tag to go through and say, yeah, I've put that on SlideShare. And again, this is content management stuff. This is not records management stuff. But when you press the button, you can see whoever's managing this site has determined as soon as you've published it, it becomes a record. All right. And we're just going to jump in. This is the file plan now behind the scenes. We just jump in and we can see that that has flown all the way through to our social media section for this year. And there's our presentation. Okay. And we can do all the bits and pieces that we can do with it as a records manager. All right, so that's trying to show you very quickly that, you know, again, in both cases, the users, if you like, the first half of both of those examples, were just doing what they need to do. Closing the case, publishing their media. Okay. What we'll show you now is the rules behind that kind of make all that automatic behavior possible. So we're going to jump back into our case files site and look at the rules that the content manager's added to here. So you can see the little rule icon on the left for those that are familiar with it. So we jump into manage rules. This is on our active case files. And if you remember, when I case closed, it became a record. So there we go. We're saying when items are updated, if the case is closed, then declare as a record. Okay? And it's as simple as that. And we can inherit that down all the way down that structure. Similarly, I think we're going to go and have a look at the there you go, the case closed area, which, if you remember, made everything a record that was dropped into it. So we have a look here. We should see if it is a type of case file, which was what that folder was, custom type, and everything's closed. Oh, sorry, set everything to closed and declare as a record. Okay. So we can visually build up. They're kind of like inbox rules, right? It was always the intention way back. They're like advanced inbox rules, really, for content and now for records. Here's our media files folder. Same but different. Again, if it's tagged with YouTube or Flickr or SlideShare, then we're simply going to declare it as a record at the bottom here. Okay. So you can see we can use tags, we can use values in content, we can use anything that's on that document as a trigger for declaration of the record. So what we're going to do now is look at the other half. This unfiled records is new in 2.1. This is like the kind of staging area for records as they flow in. And if we want to automate their filing, we can put rules on here. So we can say whenever we see a case file, we can file it to this location here. Okay. And you can see we can do value substitution in there. I think there's an example later on. Again, we're saying if we have something come in, it's got a YouTube tag, or a Flickr tag, or a slideshow tag. You can see, here we go, just down here, we're defining the path that we're going to file it to. Now here's an example, I think it lingers here. You can see this node.dm customer name. What this means is if that DM customer name comes from, as a property value, from the node itself. And that, I think, it'd be a custom property with DM probably. So you can define your custom properties like you would normally, put your metadata on them, and then when you get to this point in the process, you can actually use that information to construct the path where you want to file it to. You can see next to that it says create record folder yes. That means if the folder's not there, then create it for me. And you're going to see a lot of this expanding a lot as we go forward, because we want to, this is a non-programmatic way for records managers and content managers to actually dynamically build smarts, or actually build the file plan itself based on the context in which they find themselves. How are we doing, Tom? Okay. So very briefly, I'm going to have just a couple of slides on where we're going. I won't go into too much detail. It's just to kind of give you a flavour for our intention. And this has been my favourite graph I've drawn ever, I think. And I think this pretty much says it all, right? What we've been trying to do is get the product into a position where it's usable and can be adopted, right? And that's all about ease of use, really, for the user. But at the same time, we have to ensure that the records managers have complete control, right? Because without that, and without that reassurance of things being compliant, it doesn't really matter how easy it is to use. It's not really any use in a real life scenario. So this idea of blending it and extending, as I think what you'll see in sort of 2.2 and that 2.3 and that kind of time frame, where we will take that user use case and continue to build it out by keeping it super simple. So you may see things like being able to declare an entire record folder. You'll probably see a lot of the actions and conditions being extended out and made much simpler to use. So we don't want to have to, we can obviously always fall back on JavaScript and programmatic extensions, but obviously in the world of records managers, that really isn't something that we want to fall back on. So we're trying to make it as UI and as sensible as we can. You may even see things like what we were talking about, like sort of in-place versioning of records and all this kind of stuff. Again, one action, real simple stuff, or everything that can be automated to basically augment the working environment. But at the same time, obviously, we want to increase our compliance. We'll continue with our DoD certification. You may see possibly classified records in the next 12 to 18 months if there's a demand for it. So the continued kind of commitment to ensuring that despite, as I said, the ease of use, that it's a credible records management product and can be relied on. Sort of longer term, and this may seem a little bit of an odd slide since probably most people think we do electronic records management, and I guess we do. But the point is, the reason that's underlined is because really when we talk about electronic records, we just think of a scanned document, right? Or a document that was never physical. But it's still a document, it's still a single thing. If you look at Alfresco from a content perspective, we deal with all sorts of things. I'm sure if you're current users of Alfresco, you've probably got content models that may or may not be complex, that include one or more things. If you start to think about, well, take the example of a YouTube post, right? Obviously, we've got the actual physical post, but then you've got the item that's attached to it, the actual video, maybe in 3 or 4 different rendition forms. Then you've got all the comments that relate to that. And it's actually all of that stuff that is the record of that kind of discussion, if you like. So what we want to try and do is actually take our expertise in building complex content models and actually then allow us to manage those things as an entirety, as a record in its own right. So proper electronic only records, which kind of rubber band a collection of information and treat it as a single thing. So examples of that might be, an entire website. You might say, I'm working on a website, and actually at this point in time, bang, I want to record what I've published out to the world and take all of that information, but treat it as a single record. Or an email conversation, or even just a document with all its social commentary. So the document and all the comments that are associated with, treated as different records. And that kind of like social recording of social records is obviously something I think records managers are still scratching their heads a little bit over, because coming from a records management sort of background and not as familiar as perhaps we are with the concept of these kind of the technologies behind this. So hopefully that's where we can marry our sort of records management expertise with our content management expertise and try and blend the two together to try and do something that I don't think anybody's really kind of had a stab at yet, which is really managing these complex electronic records. Yeah, and so that's all I've got.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything you want to...
I was going to say, so Alfresco 1 with 2.1 is really around easy records management. It's how you can implement a records management solution that the end users can use without changing the way that the end user works. So you can implement this, you configure the rules, and the system knows when something needs to become a record, and it will flow it into the file plan. So it's to remove it from the end user to having to go and say, take that and drag it into the file plan, navigate, and actually put that content in there. I was going to pause for questions now. If there are any questions, we'll take those. Somebody else to point out while we're here is a guy at the front here, Tuna. Works with Roy, one of the engineers that also wrote RM 2.1. I get the good bit. These guys do all the hard work, coding and making all this thing happen. And then I go out and I demo this stuff. And it's the first time that records management is a joy to demo because it is so easy. You set up rules and you just have an attribute and you tick an attribute, and now that becomes a record without having to worry about file plans. And you show this to records managers and they say, yeah, that makes so much sense. I can see my users using this. So hats off to these two guys. But I'll now pose it open for any questions. If you've got any questions? But is everything a record that your guys create? Does everything flow into your file plan? So I would suggest then that you offer your end users Alfresco Share and say, this is their new collaboration environment. I've done a lot of work recently with customers who are interested in Alfresco 2.1, RM 2.1, and definitely the RM guys are telling me this allows them to offer something to their end users and say, now you don't have to worry about file plan. You're not constrained to working in a file plan. You work and you define the content and you can collaborate and you can work on the files, and we will define when that becomes a record. So they are seeing Alfresco Share as a way of getting end user adoption, and then behind the scenes they can start putting those rules in place to make sure that the content that the end users are creating, the content they need to capture, then starts going into the file plan. Exactly, and you don't have to do a big bang. You can say, which departments do I need to capture those records, which are the important ones I'm going to start with. So give it to, I don't know, perhaps a finance group, and they'll use Alfresco Share for managing their finance documents. And then at some point in time, you just put the rules on place and run the rules, and it will go through and start declaring records, and those records will start being flown into the file plan, and you'll start capturing them. So you don't have to have the RM in place. You can allow them to start working and then impose RM on them. And once that group's running, and now they're creating their documents, they move on to the next group, and then start imposing RM rules on that content and defining what needs to be captured and when it needs to be captured, and then having those rules whiffle through and start doing that. It makes no sense to your end users. It makes sense to somebody who understands information governance, but it makes no sense to the end users. No. So if you take ECM, most ECM solutions are a bucket. And what you do is somebody creates documents and they put them into the ECM solution and they last there and they live forever. The reality is that most content has a very well-defined useful life. Now there are legal reasons why I need to keep some information, and it's well defined of how long I should keep that. So a contract, because there's financial obligations against that contract, I should be able to track that down and do e-discovery on that and find that and make sure that nobody deletes it until the end of the contract plus 2 years. What RM gives you is that. So I can take content, declare it under records management, and now I have this thing called a disposition schedule that says this is a contract. I know when the contract expires, and therefore I'm going to delete it 2 years after that. Or this is an HR record, and I know I'm going to delete that 2 years after the employee has left the organization. So it's a way of saying, rather than just keeping everything forever, what is a useful life? What are the legal obligations from me as an organization, and how do I put that into a system that says I can now legally delete this file and get rid of it? No, that really is down to somebody in your organization understanding, what company you work for, what legal obligations you're under, and then building a file plan that understands that contracts need to be kept for the life of the contract plus a given time. Financial documents, if I do the end of year financial report, then I may need to keep that for a certain period of time. Things like social media. If the CIO is writing blog posts, well, that can have an impact on the share price of the organization. Well, therefore, I may need to capture that and control that, because somebody may say he made statements in his blog post that affected the share price. He then sold his shares, and that was wrong. So you want to be able to make sure that all that stuff is kept together. RM is about protecting yourself and as an organization, is saying we are following the correct rules. Yeah? Any other questions? Yep. That's one for you, Rob. The short answer is, once it's declared as a record, the average end user can only view it. They can't do anything else. But if they do wander into the file plan, they will be able to see any records that they've declared. But they won't be able to see any other records that you don't want them to see. And that would exactly happen here. Even though it's in place, I take away all editing rights from that person that created it. So, so once I declare it, it goes into the file plan, and it does, behind the scenes, we move it, and then we link a copy back, which is pointing at the document in the file plan. And my access rights now change based on however I've configured those, but I don't have all the access rights I used to have. And that document is now declared as a record. Whether it's complete, whether I've added all the metadata and then completed it is another thing, but I can declare it and move it into the file plan. You can configure it so that the end user can still update the metadata even though they can't change the content. Once they then complete it, then they can't change the metadata either. Correct, but you can automate that as well. You can do it if you want to. There's one of these guys have done is they've put an action which says complete a record. So if you want that all to happen seamlessly, you can have all your records flow into the file plan and be auto-declared, auto-complete, and now nothing can be changed. It may be worthwhile spending some time with these two guys after the event, and they can actually walk you through that in some more technical detail.
I'm the room monitor. I just wanted to point out it's a great discussion. We're about 5 minutes over the evening.
Apologies, guys. Yeah, thank you for coming.